Okay, what does it mean? It means you be ready to go. Okay, and you may be here and you're thinking, hey, I'm not really training for pastoral ministry. You still better be ready to go, okay? Because you are going to be more equipped, trained than probably most people in your churches. And I've been in context to, let's say you have a chance to go on overseas mission trip, and for sure, you are going to have so much more Bible knowledge and equipping than most people. I've been in contexts where you could just share the most basic thing, and it's just I've never heard of. Okay? And so I'm here with a sermon in my back pocket. We had just sickness. I don't know about your church. I mean, something's coming around St. Louis, right? Someone told me the other day that St. Louis or Missouri has been one of the most harder hit states with the flu this season, and so we just had some lightning strike Brooks Bible College in the last day. Dr. Dean Henderson sick. President Thurman just let us know, hey, he's not feeling well. All right, so I'm pinch hitting today, and I hope that we can just be blessed by what God has planned for you to hear today. I saw. This was a couple weeks ago. I saw, it wasn't so much of a highlight reel as a, man, did you see what happened this basketball game the Chicago Bulls were playing? And this guy, just got a breakaway, gets the ball, he stole it from an opposing player, and he's charging down the floor, right? No one's guarding him. He goes in for the dunk, and he's going to showboat a little bit. Holds the rim a little bit too long. He's in swing motion, and he loses his balance, he loses his orientation, and man, he comes flat on his face, hits the ground, and the camera zooms in. Oh man, his whole front row of teeth are just gone. Okay, and you just ask yourself, what possesses someone to do that? I mean, no one was standing in his way, and he's got to make a big deal of it. The truth is, if you play basketball, it's all about the dunk. Okay, the dunk is the play of power, right? It's fun. I can't dunk, so I imagine that it's fun. Actually, I have dunked many times on those rims that you shorten them to 7 feet, and you're just all over the place, right? That's a lot of fun, okay? But for these guys who can really do it, I'm sure it's fun. But it's more than that. It's not just about fun. It's a claim to dominance. It's like saying, "This is my house. This is my game. I own this game, and I own you." Okay, that's what the dunk. It's about. It's a proud boast on the basketball court, and pride is such a problem, isn't it? We just think we go through life. We just think that we're all that, and we're just falling on our faces all over the place, just like this guy. We just really reveal that we're arrogant, foolish, and in love with ourselves. When I was in high school, I had a basketball coach. His name was Coach Crummett, and he was just, he was one of these kind of old school gentlemen. Okay, he was a gentleman, but he also would tell you, things straight up. Just right in your face. Hey, this is what you're doing wrong. But he treated us young men with a sense of dignity. This is the first time that I remember someone in this kind of authority position calling you Mr. Clutterham, you're up. I don't know if Dr. Wilson, if you do that in class, but Mr. Coons, do you have something to say? Mr. Kleins, yes. There's just a sense of, hey, not Austin, not rural. but just a sense of, hey, the dignity. And that was how he functioned. And to him, basketball was all about fundamentals. Okay? And he was so exacting in his teaching us technique. We would practice to the T, all the standard plays, pick and roll, dribble drive offense, triangle offense. I mean, we were just practicing the fundamentals all day long. Except for the end of practice. At the end of practice, we would scrimmage. So we would play a practice game. And we had just this opportunity to, in our minds, let loose and play the game. I mean, it was all about fun. And when it came to those games, it was like we forgot everything he taught us. It was every man for himself. It was all about your own personal glory. It was all about the big basket. But he would be standing on the sidelines, yelling out, "Remember the fundamentals!" and get in tight there, and let's get into post position. And we needed that. But that's not how we played. In so many ways, it really parallels the Christian life, because we should really have down pat our battle with sin and temptation. I mean, that's like bread and butter for the Christian life, and yet we still need reminders. And we're going to see in our passage today that pride isn't just foolish, but it's dangerous. And if we don't take a stand against it, then pride will take away any hope for ministry that you have, and it will kill you in the process. And so we're going to look at a text from 1 Corinthians today. And when it comes to 1 Corinthians, let's give you a little bit of overview, because I want to show you something. But written in AD 55 from Ephesus, Paul's writing it on his third missionary journey when he's in Ephesus for 3 years. And Corinth, the city that he's writing to, I mean, it's just known, I mean, it's infamous, right? What does it mean to be Corinthian? Okay, someone told me that they're a pastor of a church called Corinthian Baptist Church. I'm like, who named that church? That's not a good sign, right? That's not your claim to fame. I mean, they were known for all sorts of wickedness, debauchery, moral depravity. Like many of these Greek cities, there was a Acropolis in the middle of them, so a place where kind of like a mountain, and on top of the mountain would be a temple. And in Corinth, there was a temple to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and what they were known for is there was a prostitute cult where these female prostitutes, part of their worship was sexual immorality, and there was professional prostitutes that were part of this pagan worship system. And the start of the church in Corinth was a calling out from this culture, and just the worst type of things. And there was at least 1,000 priestesses who were part of this prostitution cult. And so we're going to just look at 1 Corinthians as a whole quickly to just show, hey, there's just so much evidence of pride. In the first 4 chapters, we see that they were dividing themselves up into factions. They had claims of, hey, I'm of the Apollos group. Okay, he's my guy. Okay, and others, Paul. I learned everything from Paul. I'm with Paul, or I'm with Peter. Okay, or no, I'm with Christ alone. Okay, I don't listen to these human teachers. I'm with Christ alone. And Paul starts to give counsel to their pride. He says things like, did you know that God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the foolish things to shame those who say that they're wise. He says, you are servants, and you don't have anything to boast about that you haven't been given. In chapters 5 to 7, he's exposing that there's a looseness with sexual sin amongst them. That they're not dealing with it. They're just allowing it to kind of fester, to remain among them. And all types of confusion about marriage and the covenant relationship of marriage. And they were not willing to break fellowship with some of these just clearly disobedient people. And Paul calls them out on it. He says things like, you think that this won't influence your whole church? He says things like, I've already judged this situation. Put this person out of the church. He tries to clear up so much of their misunderstanding about marriage. In chapters 8 to 10, he's focused on an issue having to do with food and meat that was sacrificed to idols. And really the issue is not the food, but it's the way that individual believers treated one another with respect to their preferences. Okay, we'll come back to that. In chapters 11 to 14, he's really pointing out there's such an extreme selfishness, divisiveness, and boasting. One of the specific examples of their selfishness was the way that they treated each other in terms of the meal when they gathered together. Okay? So, we all know the passage 1 Corinthians 11 because it's a passage typically read when we celebrate the Lord's Supper. I don't know what the practice is of your local church in terms of frequency. What's it in terms of frequency?
We do about 6 times a year.
Okay. Is that kind of like the fifth Sunday approach, or?
No, it's the first of the month every other.
First of the month every other month. Some others. What's the approach?
I don't know if I know. I think it's once a month.
Once a month.
I don't
Yeah,
keep track.
that's very typical. Once a month. Any church do it every week? Every week.
Once a month,
Once a
first
month.
Wednesdays.
Once a month. Okay. So in the Corinthian context, it was every time you get together, there was a celebration of the Lord's Supper. And in their context, here's a scenario. There was a mixture of poor and rich. And when you're poor, guess what? You're working a lot. Okay? And so you're working day shift, you're working swing shift too. And when you get off of work, you head to the church meeting, and guess what? You find out, hey, they already started. They started a couple hours ago. They've already been celebrating the Lord's Supper, and nothing's left. And Paul's saying, you can't even wait. You can't even wait for those who are about to join it. They come in and they're humiliated because it's even more exposed that their poverty keeps them from this meal. He says, look, if you're so hungry, then eat at home before you come, and don't do this to your brother. So things like that we see just rooted in pride. And Paul calls them out. He said, prefer one another, wait for one another to arrive before you start eating. They also believed a false teaching concerning that there might not be a resurrection. And Paul has to correct their theological error to tell them about there is a resurrection, and because of that there is a final judgment. So what you do here, it matters. But we could say pride is the vice addressed on every page of this letter. And part of that's because pride is the mother of all sin. It was the first sin. It is the sin that we could say is the head sin that all sin is connected to. And so we're going to look at our passage today that falls into the middle of this whole context when Paul's addressing their sinfulness of pride, we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 10, 1 to 13. And so go ahead and turn there. And this passage, it falls into that section where Paul's addressing their liberty with respect to meat offered to idols. And how they were raising their preferences over their commitment to the well-being of their fellow Christians. He wants to expose their pride, and he wants to warn them that pride's foothold in their lives is a stronghold for the enemy. So let's read this passage. I'm going to start actually in chapter 9 and verse 24. Okay. So he says, "Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath." That was the reward for these runs, right? "But we for an imperishable. So I don't run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body, and I keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." Okay. So now as we read this second part, I want you to keep in mind that this passage is driving towards verse 12. Okay. So there's something it's building towards. So let's, chapter 10. "For I want you to know, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. We must not indulge in sexual immorality as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction, on whom the end of the ages has come." Verse 12, "Therefore, let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. And no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it." As we look at this passage, we just want to highlight a few different sections. One is that end of chapter 9. And Paul's really saying in humility that Paul pursues the Christian life as an athlete pursues sports. Embracing self-control in the arena of liberty. You see, an athlete, I'm going to say we're getting ready to witness the 2018 Olympic Games. Okay, I mean, the best athletes in the world are going to South Korea, okay, to compete against one another. And you know, there's a lot of things that they could be doing. They could be just, well, I think, you know, their actual race or event probably happens, I mean, we've watched them, they're over and done sometimes in a matter of minutes. Okay, they train for all those years, and they're amongst an Olympic Games that their part is so small. I mean, that they could spend almost all their time like a tourist there. They could engage in so many different things. They could walk around with their medal and just live it up. But athletes didn't get there by living that way. They got there by embracing self-control, by limiting themselves in the midst of their liberty. And Paul says, look, this is what I do. And I want to tell you something, that you are in the same battle. He says, let's just think about this whole opportunity of liberty with a past example. Okay? So when he comes to chapter 10, he says, let's think about the Israelites. Now, we know so much about the Israelites because God was intent on giving us an example. Okay? And he wants to tell them something about how they experienced a redemption, a deliverance from Egypt that gave them access to so much liberty. Okay? But what I'm not going to do is try to pick apart all these parts. If you're taking Professor Kirkland's New Testament course this afternoon, I want you to say, before you start, I got a question. I want you to tell me about what was the cloud and how was the rock Christ in 1 Corinthians 10:4. Okay, just a small question like that. All I want to do is I want to show you this, that the reason the point of these 4 verses is to say, look, the Israelites experienced something like you experienced in terms of your liberty. When they were delivered from Egypt, they experienced supernatural experiences. They were immersed in the presence of God's glory. And somehow they were sustained by Christ. Okay? When they drank the water, that was God providing for them. It was part of God's plan of redemption, which culminates in Christ. And so their situation is relevant to us. Okay? And let's see what they did with it. Were they like athletes in the wilderness? No, they weren't. Look at verse 5 again. He says, look, you need to think about them as an example. They had a situation like you do, but with them, God was not pleased. How do we know that? They were overthrown in the wilderness. In verse 6, now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. And that's in verse 11, he returns to that idea of they were examples. We know about them because it was written down for our instruction. Okay? So this section is about bad examples. You know, I remember, I've not seen one of these posters for years now, but you might have walked through doctor's offices, dental offices, maybe financial advisors. You walk down their hallway and they have these posters that are motivational posters. And it has a picture and then